Hello and welcome, everyone. I see that we have our numbers increasing. Wonderful to have you here today. I'm Rachel Forensic with the CDC Foundation. And again, I want to thank you for joining our monthly Hunger, Nutrition, and Health Action Collaborative webinar. This is the first webinar that we've done in 2026. So a belated but still important Happy New Year to everyone. Want to make sure you know that the Zoom chat is open. So please feel free to introduce yourself and say the organization that you're with. During the panel discussion, we will close the Zoom chat so we're not distracted as speakers, but we will then open it up towards the end. In response to feedback from you all, we have a new format for 2026. Our webinars will now be 1 hour long and will be scheduled on alternating months. So you can get all the dates and details on our website, impacthunger.org. So this is the first time we're doing this new format. And thanks for coming along for the ride. And we also welcome feedback on what you think of this longer format. And again, many of you asked for the chat to be open so you can share resources and information. Again, we will close it towards when we start having the conversation with the panel, but then we will open it back up again. So just a reminder to, be nice to each other. Please don't post any political commentary or sell any products. At any time during the webinar, you can submit questions for the panel using the Q&A feature. And we will share a recording of today's session by email, which again, you can also view on our website at impacthunger.org. I would like to now go ahead. We're going to share a poll because we always like to understand who's joining us today. So if the poll could be launched, and please take a moment to tell us what type of organization you represent. I'm going to give you all about 20 seconds to fill that out. All right, give it just another 8 seconds. All right. As usual, our biggest largest organizations represented are community national nonprofits. I think we have more community and neighborhood-based nonprofits this time than we usually do. And also a good showing from the academic community. But we are grateful to have all of you. It's a great representation today. So thank you for being here. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. Today's topic is about partnerships to improve food security in rural areas. I am really excited for this conversation. Personally, I've learned a lot. So I will say that whether you've come to this webinar because you want to get more information about your own community, I think you're going to learn a lot. And if you're not in a rural community, like I am not in one, you're going to learn a lot of great information. So I'm really excited about this. Rural food insecurity is often hidden. It doesn't match the stereotype many people picture when they hear the word hunger. And the families experiencing it are spread out. They're not always visible. And many are getting by very quietly. They stretch their meals. They buy cheaper, less nutritious food. They rely on credit, hunting, gardening, or help from neighbors and churches. From the outside, it may not look like a crisis, but it is. Nationally, about 1 in 7 households struggle to afford enough nutritious food in 2024. In rural areas, the rates are slightly higher. In fact, most of the counties with the highest food insecurity rates are rural. Some rural communities have child food insecurity rates approaching 50%. These communities face real structural challenges: lower wages, long drives to food service, grocery stores, limited transportation, and in many places, the loss of the local grocery store altogether. All of that makes consistent access to healthy, affordable food much harder than it should be. And yet, rural communities are meeting these challenges with resilience and ingenuity. Across the country, neighbors, local grocers, and community partners are building practical, homegrown solutions rooted in strong local values and shared responsibility. While today's conversation is about rural food insecurity, I want to acknowledge that rural is not a monolithic concept. Our guests today are from the Dakotas, but we don't assume that all of their challenges and successes perfectly translate to other rural communities. Also, rural issues have increasingly become urban and suburban issues. The rural-urban divide is outdated. There may be distinctions, but there is increasing similarity and interconnectedness. So again, welcome, and I'm going to turn the introductions over to my colleague Diane Kolak from the CDC Foundation. Diane?
Thanks, Rachel. Wonderful to have all of you with us today. Um, Today we have Rial Carver from Kansas State's Rural Grocery Initiative. The Rural Grocery Initiative, sorry, one sec. The Rural Grocery Initiative works with small towns across Kansas and across the country to keep locally owned grocery stores open and thriving. In rural communities, a grocery store is often more than a store. It's an economic anchor, a gathering place, and a lifeline for healthy, affordable food. Launched at Kansas State University, the initiative was built to be hands-on, provides technical assistance, research, and practical tools, everything communities need to open a store, sustain a store, or successfully transition ownership. When a grocery store stays open, jobs stay local, sales tax stays local, and community vitality stays strong. The initiative has supported hundreds of grocers through resources like the Rural Grocery Toolkit, a national summit that brings leaders together, and a statewide grocery database that helps communities plan smarter. The result is fewer rural food deserts, stronger local economies, and better access to healthy food for thousands of residents. So welcome, Rial. We are also joined by Chris Gessele from the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. His organization supports rural electric providers across the state and brings them together on key policy and infrastructure issues. Beyond their utility work, they've also stepped into the food access space, helping launch the Rural Access Distribution Cooperative to support small town grocers and working with regional food hubs to strengthen supply chains in underserved rural areas. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks
And
for
last
having me.
and last but not least, we're joined by Jenna Gullickson, operator of a local grocery store that has benefited from the work of the Rural Grocery Initiative and the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. Hoople Grocery is a locally owned store in Hoople, North Dakota, serving a town of about 250 people and the surrounding rural area. When the previous owners planned to retire in 2015, Jenna and her husband stepped in to purchase the store and keep it open for the community. Since then, Jenna has worked to sustain and strengthen local food access. Hoople Grocery is part of the Rural Access Distribution Cooperative, a collaboration among small town grocers to improve purchasing power and distribution. In 2025, the store received a Rural Grocery Store Sustainability Grant from the North Dakota Association from the North Dakota Department of Commerce to support its long-term viability. Today, Jenna joins us to share her experience operating a rural grocery store and participating in regional food access efforts. And Jenna is joining us from her store, so we're extra grateful that she's taking this time to be with us. We're so glad to have you all here for this important conversation. I'll turn it back over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Diane. Again, Rael, Chris, and Jenna, thank you so much for giving us your time today. Really looking forward to this conversation. Rael, I'd love to start the conversation with you. You have called grocery stores anchors of rural life. When a grocer goes out of business, that can really impact the communities they serve in terms of access to healthy food. Can you help us connect the dots between food security in rural areas and your work at the Rural Grocery Initiative at Kansas State?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be here today on this panel. I'm glad to be here with my colleagues. So yes, to start, we at the Rural Grocery Initiative really think about how rural grocery stores are so much more than groceries. They are critical infrastructure in small towns. They are economic drivers in your local community. They can be social hubs and gathering spaces for community members. They can be um, drivers or generators of quality of life in a community. And as you mentioned, they are critical places for access to healthy food. And so the locally owned rural grocery store is thought to have better selection at better prices than convenience store counterparts. And these locally owned rural grocery stores tend to have some stronger connections to the local community, whether that's local producers or even just highlighting some of the local character of the small town. And so we know that these rural grocery stores are important um, generators and supporters of community health because of the role they play in the community.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is there anything else that we might not have included about the Rural Grocery Initiative at Kansas State that you feel like would be important for us to know about as we dive into this conversation and what you do?
Yeah, I would just highlight some of the things that we do. I would say our primary way that we support rural communities is through technical assistance. And so that really is just listening to rural community members or grocery stores and hearing some of the challenges they're facing and connecting them to other resources, connecting them to other contacts who may have worked through similar challenges. We also conduct some research, and that research is meant to lift up or address some of the challenges that we hear about in rural communities and rural grocery stores. We have a variety of informational resources that we can pull from and connect people to, whether those are funding resources or ownership models. And then lastly, we complete a variety of programming, including our National Rural Grocery Summit, which really is our flagship program that happens every other year and is the premier venue for all things rural grocery. And our next summit will be in May of 2026. And we're excited to be headed to North Dakota. We're partnering with the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Co-ops as well as Minnesota Extension to host that event in Fargo in May 2026. So yeah, so that kind of shares the breadth of work that we provide. While we're based in Kansas, we're based in the Midwest, we have a lot of strong connections in that area. We are able to support beyond Kansas and the Midwest with others that are facing some challenges related to rural food access.
Great. Thank you. Really glad to know you all exist as a resource, and I'm sure our audience will as well. Let's pull in your colleague, Chris. You just mentioned the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives. So, Chris, nice to have you. At first glance, your organization might seem like an odd fit, let's say, for a webinar about food systems. Can you explain to us how shared service co-ops work and how NDAREC got started with supporting rural grocery stores?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me and having this super important discussion. And then I can attest to the quality of the Rural Grocery Initiative's programming. I took their Rural Grocery Transition Specialist course, and it was super helpful. So Yeah, you do great work down there. But yeah, I guess NDREC could be viewed as the odd duck in this group. Maybe just a lay of the land will help describe or explain our involvement in this real food systems work. So RECs, and maybe this is commonly known, but we're not-for-profit utilities that are owned by the people they serve. Origins in the 1930s, electricity was a new thing, and independent or investor-owned utilities couldn't see or find the profit in serving these sparse rural areas and building infrastructure and generation and lines. So neighbors banded together and formed their own power companies, and hence the birth of our electric co-ops. NDAREC is a trade organization for rural electric co-ops in North Dakota. So it is an umbrella organization, but provide different trainings, advocacy, legislative lobbying. And as part of those services, we offer rural development services. That center started in 1994. And we do promote and support development of co-ops and economic development through technical assistance, consultation, some financing, some co-op education. And it's really born from the co-op principles, primarily two of them, concern for community and cooperation among co-ops. So we're financially supported by our members, by the rural electric co-ops and broadband co-ops in North Dakota, and then some federal funding. And all that to say, that's kind of led to our involvement in rural grocery, that concern for community and concern for rural areas and solving their challenges. In 2014, the rural development director at the time at our center started seeing an uptick in calls from rural grocers about some equipment failings and needing some funding for equipment, some just operational challenges. And in true co-op fashion, we connected people, brought people together to look at the issue and formed a task force. And that initial survey found that for these small rural grocers, wholesale prices based on volume purchases that go well beyond the grocer's ability to move product in their stores. There's low sales volumes at these stores and then limited access to suppliers. Sometimes these stores and communities aren't deemed economically viable to bring a truck to from the perspective of the distributor. So further exploration of the challenges led to a potential solution, and that was shared service entity or shared service co-op in this instance. An official definition, so this is a business entity that's owned and controlled by individuals, private businesses or public entities, and those become the members of the co-op, and they're able to more economically purchase services and or products. In the rural grocery sense, it allows these independently owned grocery stores, so they maintain their independent status, but come together to share certain functions. And those certain functions could be aggregated purchasing to increase their purchasing power. There could be shared marketing services, and then back office functions too, like accounting, can be shared. So we'll touch more on that later. The Rail Access Distribution Co-op is a wonderful example of a shared service co-op, and Jenna in Hoople is a member of that co-op. So we'll touch on that more in depth later.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I have to admit I did not know about rural electric co-ops, and I really enjoyed learning about it. You have a great video on your website that explains it really clearly. So thank you for that. And let's transition to hearing from you, Jenna. You talk about being on the ground. You are on the ground in the store right now as we speak. And I wanted to hear a little bit about your story in your own words. Can you tell us a little about Hoople Grocery, what your story is and who you serve? You and your husband bought Hoople Grocery when a lot of people might have said it's time to shut the doors. What did you see that others might not have seen?
Everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Yeah, I I don't know if I maybe saw something that other people didn't see, but 10 years ago, we had gotten wind that the previous owners who had had the store for 30 plus years were looking to retire. I just had my first kid, so I was like, why not change careers and buy the grocery store in our town? I always joke with my husband that I said, even in your wildest dreams, because my husband grew up in this community, I said, did you think you'd ever own the grocery store in town? And he goes, absolutely not. So we bought it from them. I have raised my kids here. We put the pack and play right next to me at the cash register. Again, small community, like they said, 250 people. You count the surrounding outside, 500 people. But everybody knows everybody. They come pick my kids up and put them in the shopping cart and go shop around. Also, just so people know, I am the one-stop shop in our town. We also have the only gas pump in town. So I am a little bit of both. I'm a little bit of a convenience gas station, but I am also the grocery store. As we continue on in this webinar, we'll give more examples of that, but I like to tell people that I think we're really changing, even people who have lived here most of their lives, kind of maybe we were thought a little bit more of a convenience store before, less groceries, but I really think a lot more people do more of their grocery shopping here since we have joined the cooperative. And that is because we are able to we have access to more products, so we can provide more products on our shelves to our customers. So I think people view us as a little bit more of a grocery store now and a little bit less of a convenience store. We just love our community. I've grown to love this community. I am from just a neighboring community, but we are open 7 days a week here. Little more limited hours on the weekend, but we are here 7 days a week for people. Again, small community. Everyone has your number. They can call if there's an emergency. If someone needs something, you call us up and we will come and open our doors. My kids are 10 and 7 now. They're here for a half hour with me before school in the morning. And my kids, they can run the till and talk to the customers and help them out. And they just love seeing their smiling faces when they come in here. So we are just happy to be here and do what we can. And we'll touch on it also. And they said it in my intro, but we recently just received a grant. And so we're going to be putting an addition on our building because my problem now is that we have outgrown our space. I have every inch of my wall covered with products, freezers, coolers, shelves, and I need more space. So that is a very good problem for us to have.
That's fantastic. And I love the story of how the access to the additional services and the shared services are really allowing you to expand the services that you've been able to, the food that you've been able to provide to your community. And yeah, nothing like a new mom being resourceful and reinventing yourself as you bought the grocery store. So thank you so much. We're gonna dive back into that, but I want to come back to you, Rial, and come back to the national picture for a minute. Jenna was talking a little bit about things super local. We know that national food security is trending really in the wrong direction. There are more than 14 million children in food insecure households, and the counties with the highest food insecurity rates are disproportionately rural. When you listen to the national conversation, do you hear rural hunger in the discussion, or are rural communities still the afterthought in anti-hunger policy?
Yeah, it is ironic to think that rural communities may be facing food insecurity when you think about how rural America for so long has been the breadbasket and been where food is produced. But obviously, we're here today because that it is a challenge accessing affordable, healthy food consistently in rural communities. And there seems to be a tendency to think that hunger challenges can be addressed in the same way, no matter where they are. And um, I think Jenna and Chris would both agree that having something that is more tailored to rural reality is important. And I'll share an example of what that kind of looks like. So, distribution to a rural grocer might be a challenge. You might also hear that distribution is a challenge in an urban area, but the way that those things are addressed looks very different. For instance, um, the rural grocer might be having a challenge getting the distributor to visit their store or service their store, or potentially needing to work with a different distributor altogether that doesn't have as competitive of pricing or as great of a variety. So that's the challenge that rural communities are facing. Urban stores may also have a distribution challenge, and their reality might be that the distributor they want to work with only uses large tractor trailers, and that tractor trailer doesn't fit down the alley that services their store. And so they may also be having to find a different creative solution, but the way that you kind of work around that is slightly different in urban and rural areas. Those are just some examples of, sometimes you see the same challenges in urban and rural areas, but the way that you need to address them looks a little bit different. Um, and I also want to just take a second to share some of the landscape of grocery and why rural grocery has maybe even some more challenges than the typical grocery store. So to begin, grocery as a business is a very slim margin business. So whether you're in urban, rural, suburban, national chain or not, typically the net profit margins are running between 1% and 3%. And so that means that for every dollar in sales that comes in the store, 97 to 99 cents is going towards keeping the store open, stocking the shelves, paying staff, paying off your mortgage, paying your rent, that all of that. And so then 1 to 3 cents remains to buy new shelving or expand the store, and to help you stay competitive. So those, like just the baseline of the grocery business means it's a challenging business to begin with. And this is why you hear people talk about the grocery business as a volume game. Basically, the more that you're purchasing, the more that you're selling. 1 to 3% on 2 million in sales a year versus 1 to 3% in 2 billion sales per year. That's a pretty big difference, and that means you have very different buying power, very different opportunities to innovate and upgrade and remain competitive. And so, all that to say that in current sort of policy realms, there are a few different topics that I would say are trending that may not be specifically talked about from a rural perspective, but absolutely have connection to rural grocery stores. I think some of the conversation around antitrust regulation or enforcement and fair pricing could have a direct impact on rural grocery and rural food access. Um, Credit card fees are something that rural grocers have lifted up as a challenge for currently. There are some regulations around debit card fees, but credit cards are a bit more of the Wild West. And so some stores are really having to pay a lot per transaction if people are paying with credit card. And back to that volume game, if that can be eating into your 1 to 3% and then leaving even less behind. So some of those national conversations around policy. While they may not be specifically tailored to rural America, they absolutely relate to the reality of rural grocery.
Thanks for that, Rael. Understanding that small margin, 2% really helps illustrate the tentative nature of that the grocery stores are operating on. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. We're going to pivot over to Chris and Jenna and get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of what it takes to keep rural grocers in business. In places where people may be driving a long way to shop and where many small stores serve a high share of households, and people are trying to stretch every dollar. How does this actually work day to day, Chris and Jenna? And what does it take to convince distributors and suppliers to think creatively about solutions to serve remote areas? Some of the challenges that Rael just brought up for us.
Yeah, maybe I can kick things off, and then Jenna, if you can jump in and talk about some RAD specifics in your experience in the Rural Access Distribution Co-op. And when I say RAD, I mean Rural Access Distribution Cooperative. So for a reference there, yeah, I just would echo a lot of what Rial said. We've heard it said that grocery is a penny business, and so you need to be aware of where your pennies are going. And if you're not, it's things aren't going to go well for long. North Dakota specifically, there are some realities that cause some unique challenges. Just the sparseness of the population. So half the population in North Dakota lives in rural areas, and 86% of towns have populations of less than 1,000. Just kind of shows you the size of the communities we're working with. And in grocery stats, since 2015, more than 40 of the state's 137 rural grocery stores in communities of 2,100 or less have closed. So there's definitely some challenges there, and just echo Rial, the margins, it's volume game, and getting more people in the door. It's been said too that increased sales cures all ills. And so I always think you definitely watch where the pennies are going and reduce your costs wherever possible. But if you can bring more people in the door and increase the cart sizes when they're there and buying entire meals, that's the key. Another big challenge that we've noticed is staffing challenges in these rural areas. There's not enough help, or reliable help. These grocery store owners are at the till, then they're back in the bakery, and they're back at the at the meat counter, and they're running crazy, putting in long days, in some cases not paying themselves. So that's definitely an issue. And then larger retailers in nearby cities are a major source of competition for these smaller stores. And this in part ties into what Rial touched on with antitrust laws and lack of enforcement of some laws that are on the books. So we could touch on that too in a little bit later. But creativity, collaboration, and an even playing field for these real grocers and there's larger retailers are required to make things work. So yeah, just that creativity point. One concept that has proven out is the shared services co-op, which is that RAD cooperative that I mentioned. And it's grocery stores sharing and purchasing, and that last mile distribution from a hub store to the spoke stores, and then some tech upgrades too that have come along with that. So in terms of like the RAD nuts and bolts, Jenna, would you like to step through based on that, those maps there on how the RAD process works?
Yeah. So when I was approached about this RAD co-op, it was kind of like, hey, would you like to purchase things together so you can get better prices and bring better prices to your customers? And I'm like, absolutely. Why not? Why would I say no to that? So you'll see in the middle, the hub there is the Park River Grocery Store. That is Jim's Super Value. So that's the biggest city, which is still like, I don't know, 1,500, 1,800 people. So they have the largest grocery store. And so Diana is the owner there. Her parents owned it before her. She grew up in the grocery store. She also took it over. So she had to talk to UNFI, that is her distributor. And she talked to them about giving me Hoople Grocery and then the Edinburgh Grocery Store, Market on Main, making us sister accounts within them. So she was explaining to them that we are not asking you to go to these smaller stores. We are asking you to give these smaller stores sister accounts so we can still do our own ordering, but it is still all dropped off at the hub store in Park River at Jim's Super Value, which in turn, they go ahead and offload it off their truck. Our co-op bought a refrigerated truck. They divvy everything out onto carts, and then they load it up on our truck, and they come out and they deliver it to our grocery stores. Since then, it started out with us 2 grocery stores, and then you'll also see the schools on there. We are the Valley Edinburgh School District, so that encompasses our daycare through 2nd grade at the Hoople School, here where I am. Over in Crystal, which is about 5 miles away, that is 3 through 6th grade. And then over in Edinburgh is our junior high through senior high, 7th through 12th grade. And so they were having some distributor issues. And so they had talked to us too about if they could get in on this. And so what they mainly do, because schools it's a little bit of a different animal. They have their own vendors that they have to have approved things from, but they get all their fresh produce from us. They get their milk through us. So our RAD co-op also services these 3 schools and brings that to their schools every week. And then you will see down, well, it's off to my left, the Fordville Bar and Grill. Steve there has a place. They lost their grocery store a few years ago. And so they put in a locker system there. So people can go online. They can order their groceries. It goes into Jim's Super Value in Park River. They get all the groceries together, and depending on how many deliveries they have, they run out to Fordville 1 or 2 times a week, put the groceries in, either the refrigerated, the frozen, just the shelf stable stuff, and they put it in the lockers. The customer is then sent an email, given a code, a text, however they sign up to do it. And they are alerted that their groceries are there, so they can go pick them up whenever they want. They go to these lockers, punch in the codes, boom, their lockers pop open, and there's their groceries delivered right to them. Diana also has a set of lockers outside her store in Park River. And she, I know, was saying too, we have a rural hospital right there in Park River. Well, any nurses that have shift work, by the time they actually get off shift, the grocery store in Park River is actually almost even closing. So I know a lot of them like it. They can place their grocery order, boom, go over there, punch in their code, pick up their groceries, and head home after a 12-hour shift at the hospital. So those are just a few ways that we've been doing it. But so by doing this together, we get the lower pricing through UNFI. Again, I have a lot more options now. I have customers coming in all the time asking me, can you get this? Can you get that? And I said, yep, let me look at it. Depending on what it is and depending on the case size, because sometimes case sizes are still too big. But that was the point of this cooperative. There's 3 of us stores now that can share it. So then I'm like, hey, I have someone who wants this, but I think I only need, a quarter case or half case. Would one or both of you be willing to take the other part of it? And that way we're still getting the case cost, because you have some vendors where, yeah, you can break down the cases into halves or eaches, but every time you're breaking something down, you're getting charged more for doing that. I have also had some vendors in the past few years now that have dropped me. I'm a smaller store. They have their own decisions to make too at their companies. But now that I am part of this cooperative, they still go to Jim's Super Value in Park River because they're a bigger store. So now depending on the company, like milk, I can still put in my milk order by myself, but it's still delivered to Jim's, and then in turn, our rad co-op brings it up on their truck. I have another supplier that I actually just text Diana at the store, and she puts it in with her order. And again, they break it apart and they bring it up to us on our truck. So it's really given me a lot of advantages to some suppliers that I have lost in the past due to being a small store and they do not want to come out here and service you. I've been able to get some of those products back. And again, like I said, I'm running out of room in my store, so I'm actually putting an addition on my store. The bakery in Park River, I get my fresh buns and bread there. I make lunches here at noon, just a hot sandwich, whatever it may be. I also make cold sub sandwiches, so I get my bread from them every week. And then on Fridays when they deliver, we get bakery treats up here too. So everybody likes that. We have our local potatoes that are grown right here around Hoople. And so that is, well, they've always been part of our store in the Edinburgh store. They are also now available at Jim's Super Value in Park River. They pick them up when they're up here and they backhaul them over to Park River. So it has just opened up all these possibilities. It wouldn't have been possible without this co-op, and it has just been really awesome, really great, and just happy that I can do this for my community and provide this.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. And to piggyback real quick, on Jenna's point of setting up a sister accounts under the spokes or the hub store, that's something that this distributor generally didn't do. And it took some convincing of them to set it up this way. And I think the key there was them maintaining that volume at Park River and then picking up some volume with the Hoople and Edinburgh stores, who mainly went with a different distributor who is more commonly seen as kind of a convenience store distributor, but some of that volume potentially shifting to UNFI. So I think that was appealing to the distributor and helped convince them. And they came around, and it ended up that the Diana at the hub store was named the Regional Innovative Retailer of the Year for UNFI and the National Customer of the Year, I think both in 2023. So that was really cool to see.
That's amazing. I love the way you are explaining the creativity and the connections that really go into making sure that all of these communities have sufficient access to food. So thank you for walking us through all of that. We've been getting so many questions from the audience, and I'm embarrassed to see we have many, many more questions for our panel. So we want to make sure that we have time for both. I'm going to shift over to you, Rial, and this is going to be kind of the last word, and then we'll go to some of the audience questions. But I know you talked with us about some of the challenges that rural grocery stores face. We heard about this co-op model that uses shared purchasing to incentivize distributors to come in, but sometimes the owner of the store just can't keep going. And I know that your work at RGI has a special program for that, so I want to make sure you have an opportunity to talk about the succession planning work that you do, and then after that we'll transition to some of the great questions that have been rolling in.
Yeah, so as far as some of our succession planning work, I would say that for years, the Rural Grocery Initiative has had a focus on alternative models of owning and operating rural grocery stores. And so fairly early in our being, we started to explore these different models. And so these are things like cooperatives or nonprofits or public-private partnerships, school-owned or operated grocery stores. And really, I think off the bat, I would say that what I've learned over the years is that there is no limit. There are all sorts of creative ways to operate a grocery store, and it really depends very much on the local community and what that local community is willing to support and kind of push forward. The other thing I'd say is that these alternative ownership models are not what people look to first. It's not the first line of defense. It's often something that is developed as the market around them maybe fails them, or, as it is difficult to find another independent operator, or another local grocery store that wants to have a secondary location. And so these alternative ownership models can be a way to still have a grocery store in the community, still have the benefits that we've already talked about that rural grocery stores bring to the table, while also leveraging some of the local um, partnerships and interest and passion that exists in that community. And so that's really what I've learned in my time supporting these alternative ownership models. The other thing that sticks out to me listening in to Jenna and Chris talk is that the rad co-op model is an example of willingness to work together when some might look at this and say, well, they're competitors. Why would they choose to work together? But instead, this group of grocers saw the opportunity to lift each other up. And I think that's a really valuable way of thinking about rural challenges, whether it's related to food or not. And so yeah, I think that the sky is the limit in terms of what rural communities can come up with to serve their local needs.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh,
Diane, shall I jump in with some of the questions?
yeah.
I lost connectivity for a second, but it let me back in. So here I am. Really, I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat just about what a great example of collaboration this is. The RAD model, the cooperative electric co-ops, all of that, really inspiring. And I really feel like it has driven home for me how important grocers are, especially rural grocers, in the public health for the public health professionals, and as those who we all care about the health of our community, and grocery stores are so important, and even more so in very small communities. I'm going to jump into some questions. We have a lot, and I know we won't get through all of them. It's already almost 4:20. Here's a question for any of you that feel like you want to speak to it. How can people with medically necessary diets and food insecurity find the right food in rural communities?
I'll toss my 2 cents out there that I think that shared purchasing opportunities or entities like the Rad Co-op, I think enables these smaller stores to order some specialty items that they couldn't otherwise get through the distributor. Whether the distributor wouldn't provide that to the store, or they'd be in too great a volume, maybe that the store couldn't end up using. So, and I don't know, Jenna, if you have experience in placing like special orders through Diane at the hub store, or how you've seen that work.
And I feel like you hear a lot more about, the dairy-free, the gluten-free, certain of these other, diabetes, so the watching the sugars and all that kind of stuff. Yes. So those are some of those things where, depending on the product, I will always tell customers, I will look it up for you and let you know. And like I said, if sometimes the case sizes are small, but you never know. Products are so different. So again, happy to look it up for them. And then if the cases are still too big and I think it's something that I am not going to be able to get rid of in time, yes, that is where you talk to your sister stores and just being like, hey, do you guys carry this? Or would you be willing to carry this? And then if we can work it out, that's typically what we do. So, every once in a while, might not be able to, or we maybe can't find a specific brand that we're looking for. That's happened before too. Someone is very brand specific about something they're looking for, that I do not have access to, but we do our best. And like I said, we communicate between each other and see what we can do to serve our customers and keep them here and keep them local.
I think the beauty too of rural areas, and this ties into what Rial was saying about, the rising tide lifts all ships and looking out for each other. I don't think there has to be even a formal collaboration between stores in these rural areas where one could just call up the other if there's an existing relationship already, or even if there's not, and have that conversation about getting a product off of someone else's shelf.
And we, in Kansas, we did a survey last summer, and asked a question. It was a survey of our rural grocers, and we asked a question around what health-related offerings they provided already. And gluten-free and dairy-free, over 60% had dairy-free, over 70% had gluten-free, which was higher than I expected. So I think that you might be surprised if you reach out to your local grocer. And obviously, that's not every medically specific diet item, but I think you might be surprised if you ask.
There's a couple questions related to challenges facing older adults that are living in rural communities. Can any of you talk about how you see that being addressed and what can be done to prioritize this often overlooked population, particularly homebound or vulnerable seniors?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I'll share two things. One, around the pandemic, around, in 2020, 2021, there was a lot of interest in online or in grocery delivery. And I remember reaching out to a few different grocers about this, and we were developing some materials on sort of how to implement grocery delivery in a rural grocery store. And what we heard was, we've been doing that for years. If somebody needs us to bring groceries to their house, we're happy to do that. Just give us a call. And so I think that grocers are very connected to rural grocers in particular, are very connected to their customers and know. They may notice if someone who usually comes in once a week didn't, and they'll reach out to see what's going on. So I think that's one thing to think about. And then in terms of the realities when a locally owned rural grocery store closes, it's the older adults in the community that are sometimes most affected. Older adults who may still be getting out of the house, but really probably shouldn't be driving long distances to get to other stores. And small town stores tend to be a little bit smaller footprint, which actually can be better for older adults to get around and to navigate. And so I think that the conversation, it definitely goes hand in hand. The viability of the local grocery store and the health of older adults is, working together in tandem.
Oh, I think you hit the nail on the head with that too. Like you said, there is the online ordering. I know some people that maybe their loved ones don't live around here, so they would like the option to be able to go online and order the groceries for their parents. I know Jim's Super Value in Park River, they do have the online ordering. But yeah, like in my town, just call you up on the phone and they tell you what they want. I walk around, I grab it for them. And depending on, I tell them I might not be able to get it out to you right away, or they do have family or friends that live in town and they're like, yeah, can you just get this together for me? They'll come pick it up, because also from a small town, I have charge accounts. So that makes it really convenient. Also, I just write it down on their slip and I send them out a bill at the end of the month. So yes, and I have a lot of older people too. Like I said, we We do some of our own meat cutting, steaks, pork chops, some of these other things. But I try to be conscious too. We do have some older single people even that live in this community. They don't want to buy this big quantity of things. So we cut and package single things that they can just grab themselves. When I'm ordering, if I find something in a little bit of smaller quantity, I try to have some of those options on the shelf for them because they're just cooking for themselves.
This is wonderful. Um, I have one more question to ask before we are wrapping up, and that is around if any of you know if there might be a list or where people could turn to see if there are shared service grocery co-ops like RAD across the country. Someone's in Michigan and they're curious if there are any other in the Midwest. I learned just talking to a colleague a couple hours ago that South Carolina has maybe not the grocery store, but the rural co-op. So is there any place that folks can go for that kind of information if they want to get connected and learn more about those?
Yeah, Ryle, I don't know if you're aware of any. I believe this was the first of its kind, is my understanding. There were some replication efforts. Are folks interested in replicating in Nebraska, New York, in a more urban setting, and then I think in Kansas too. And I'm not up to speed on how those have went. And then in North Dakota too, we're working on, we call it RAD replication, but I mean, I think lightning kind of struck with the RAD project and its success, and just the right mix of folks and stores for that. But yeah, I think this might be one of a kind, to my knowledge.
That's my
Might be
understanding as well,
it
that it
is.
is kind of the first of its kind. And if you haven't picked up on it already, I think that the people involved are really part of what made it come together. And the willingness to troubleshoot and sort of figure this out was key.
No doubt. And I'm sure there are going to be more folks after this call that are going to be interested in exploring this. I can't believe that it's 4:27 already. I wasn't sure how an hour was going to feel, but it sure felt like the old 30 minutes. I wanted to close with just a few remarks, if that's okay. I think Diane put in the chat that if there's one thing that you are going to do this week because of what you learned today, we'd love to hear it. Please share your thoughts in the chat. There will also be a survey that comes up at the end of the call. We'd love to hear what you thought about it, the presentations, as well as the new format. We also want to make sure you go ahead and register for our next webinar, which is going to be on April 22nd, impacthunger.org. I cannot thank you all, Chris, Rial, and Jenna, for your involvement today, but even more importantly, for the really important work that you're doing. It's really inspiring and really important work. Again, I thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone being here today, and we hope that folks will come back in April. And remember too that we're always open to feedback on additional topics that you want to hear from. So, Jenna, Rial, Chris, thanks again so much. This was such an interesting conversation, and I really hope that I find ways to connect with you all in the future. So, thank you so much.
Thank
I hope
you.
everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.